So life as a tech writer in Australia is, I would definitely say it's improved. Like we are spoiled for choice in that sense.
Hi, welcome back to the channel. This is a very, very special episode because we have our first guest ever all the way from Australia. Swapnil, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Amrita. And pleasure being here. I think first guest and everything. So the expectations are really high, but hopefully this will go well. So, hi, my name is Swapnil. I am a technical writer and I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. I've been here for about 20 years, I think, coming up to 20 years this year. And yeah, I've known Amrita through her blogs and YouTube channel for quite a few years now, but this is the first time we are actually getting to meet. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks for coming on the channel. I'm super excited to chat because I have been in the Indian tech writing bubble and then I have been in the US tech writing bubble, and those are like the only worlds that I know. So I'm very curious to know about how life as a technical writer in Australia works. So, yeah, I guess let's just jump right into it. What's your origin story as a tech writer?
I've been a career tech writer. Like I've worked in Australia all my life as a tech writer, but even before I came to Australia, I come from India. And I think Amrut and I probably come from the same town in India as well, Pune. So there you go. But look, I've been here for 20 years, and tech writing is the only thing that I've done and I've known, and I'm still passionate about it. The way it started was I actually knew about tech writing as a profession even when I was doing my uni back in India when I was doing my bachelor's. So I knew there were developer roles, there were testing roles, and there was this, pretty new sort of role back. This is way back, I think, late 90s, I think, when someone told me you can also become a tech writer. So it's one of those fields that's coming up rapidly, and people are, looking for people who can write about whatever they're building, whatever they're creating. So that's how I sort of got interested. I've always been a writer. Like even before I became a tech writer, I've written. I've used to at school. I used to write. I've done freelance gigs when I was in India. I'm working for local newspapers. I've done writing. It's not technical, obviously, but still writing. So I think this profession kind of, instead of me choosing the profession, I think the profession chose me because I was already writing. I'm not saying I'm 100% perfect, but I love writing. So I think that takes the pain out of a lot of other people's lives where people are not very open to documenting, and I'm like, that's fine, I'll put my hand up and I'll do that. So, and that's how I came into tech writing. So learning about technology and being able to write it and express it in a way that helps other people is how I got into tech writing. So I finished my master's in information systems, and I was working in the data analysis field for a couple of years before I realized, okay, this was the time I really needed to get into, do something about being a tech writer. So there was a course in a local uni being offered, a graduate diploma for technical writing, and I finished that. It was a 2 years part-time course at Swinburne Uni. I'll shout out their name as well, Swinburne Uni, in Melbourne, Victoria. And I did that course, and I think it changed me for the better, because at the end, in my last semester, I got my first gig as a tech writer, like an official tech writer with a healthcare company, which is pretty unusual. But there you go. So from that, I guess, moment onwards, I've been tech writing, and I'm still a tech writer. I'm still enjoying it.
So I didn't know that you pursued a graduate degree in tech writing. You're one of the very few people who that I know who have done that. I did that too, and people ask me if I would recommend it, and it always stumps me because yes, it made me a better tech writer, but I don't know if that's a way into the industry.
Yeah.
But I think your experience is exactly opposite that of that is how you got into the industry.
Yeah, I think what that helped me, that course, was obviously become familiar with tech writing techniques and tools, and also the network of technical writers. Like this was again 15 or 16 years back, when the community was really small in Melbourne, at least, or even in Australia overall. And that gave me a good insight of getting to know the people who are actually doing this in the field. And there's we had like only a handful of us who were doing like proper tech writing, and in different industries, software, manufacturing, defense, or whatever it might be. And that was I think one of my goals was to be able to improve my network so that I could get a better opportunities, and also know about what sort of opportunities exist within that tech writing sphere. And I think that was probably the most beneficial thing I got out of the course was we had some really awesome lecturers. I'm still in touch with most of them, and you know, along with learning some really good tech writing tools and tips and techniques, it was just those networks that I built that really helped me along the way.
Yeah, I think for me, because I already was in the industry and then I came here for my master's and then I went back to the industry, I can't like for sure say that the master's degree was like a gateway into the industry, but I definitely agree that it made me a far better tech writer than I was like as a self-taught tech writer. So thanks for the validation.
Oh, absolutely. Look, anything you can, prove to employees, and this is probably you're right. Like these days, having a graduate diploma, I wouldn't have thought, that gave me an edge over anyone else, but at least it gave people like or employers an understanding that okay, he knows what he's talking about. He knows the basics of tech writing at least. So it's just an extra validation, extra tick that yeah, that's fine. He's got a proper degree in tech writing. So not that that holds you against anyone else. Like there are better applicants out there in the hiring process, and they're far better writers. But it's just that understanding of the techniques and whatever makes a good tech writer.
What came next after you graduated and got your first job? What's the journey from that to where you are now?
Yeah, look, it's been really interesting. Like I said, my first job as a tech writer was working for a healthcare company. Like they did software systems for radiology and pathology clinics. So again, I had no idea. And this is the beauty of tech writing is tech writers jump in all sorts of domains without any sort of context or previous background in that. Like most of them that I know have done that, and they just pick it up. Like it's one of those things as a tech writer, you've got to be able to pick up whatever domain you're in and be able to write about it, because end of the day it's you're writing about systems and processes and procedures with, I guess, on a core level that stays the same, but it's just that domain knowledge that you need to pick up. And tech writers pick that up pretty quickly than anyone else probably that I know of, because they have to be pretty adaptable and flexible in that way. So my first job was that, and then from there on I've done a lot of contract work, because I think I wanted to get a taste of what's out there with different industries and different domains. So healthcare, then I went into telecommunications, I've gone into engineering, I've gone into software, I've done tech writing gigs with financial organizations. So it's pretty much like a whole array of different industries that employ tech writers in Australia. So that, I think, where that got me was being able to at least pick up knowledge across different industries, and being able to demonstrate that it is, look, those skills are transferable. So if I can I can write in healthcare, I can write in software, I can write in engineering, that means I can write anywhere else as well. So that's been my journey so far. Right now I work for a company called Redocly. So we're into API documentation and API design products, and I'm the tech writer advocate there. So it's a very sort of a hybrid role, probably first of its kind in that tech writing space, because it's an official title where I not only get to obviously document features that we develop, but I also get to advocate for good tech writing practices within the organization, and also help out tech writers who want to, or even organizations who want to take up Redocly products. So yeah, that's me at the moment. That's what I've been doing, and it's a hybrid role, and I'm enjoying, presenting at conferences about our products, and overall just tech writing, tips and other things, like whatever's going on in tech writing industry with different methodologies and stuff. And but I also, half of my job is documenting, so I get to work with developers and actually design some of our documentation for the around the feature, but also help them with UI improvements and anything that goes within the product. So it's a very sort of an exciting role.
Having been a part of so many different industries, what's your favorite?
I would still say probably software. Like anywhere where you've got a lot of dominance of softwares, because they just from experience, a lot of software industries have heard of tech writers before, so there's a little bit more openness towards getting that position of a tech writer in, and you don't have to do a lot of advocacy. But having said that, look, I've worked in software industry, like a couple of software companies where the companies existed for about 2 decades, but they've never had a tech writer before, and that's surprising, because all of their documentation has been created ad hoc by developers or whoever could go in and work on that particular moment. And you could see the differences, like what a tech writer would probably produce as opposed to what other people have produced, as on the side sort of a thing. So, but yeah, to answer your question, software industry is definitely, because you don't have to do a lot of advocacy for the role or what what the value a tech writer brings. But other than that, most of the other industries I've worked on, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's lack of understanding of how does a tech writer provide value to our industry or this particular process or system. And yeah, so it's a little bit of a different challenge, or there's more challenges along in other industries.
Okay, so moving on from your journey to life as like a tech writer in Australia, like the Australian tech writing scene, tell me more about it.
In the last couple of years, I actually start with where it is today. There's a lot of new software organizations, and even like small startups and everything that have come into the picture that actively are hiring for technical writers, and that's such a a refreshing change in the industry. Like last year, there were so many jobs coming out of different organizations, and that tech writers were actually spoiled for choice in terms of not only what they could pick, but what where they could work, and they could demand better rates and stuff like that in contracting terms. But that hasn't always been the case. Like traditionally, Australia is largely a service industry, so we do a lot of, obviously we have a lot of defense and manufacturing and financial organizations, so we do a lot of documentation that's not directly software related. So a lot of my earlier gigs were around processes and policies and work instructions within that were very internal for internal users. So yeah, so that's what it was like. Back then it was a slightly different story when I started as a tech writer, but these days it's a lot more open, and you've got a lot of startup actions, but also big organizations. Like we've got Google Teams and Atlassian, like a big giant in that space, and they hire a lot of tech writers. And there's also other organizations in Australia coming up who've landed here only recently, I would say, like within the last 5 or so years, and they're actively hiring people who actually are into tech writing, content design, and all sorts of all manner of writing, really.
How do you break into the Australian tech writing scene? Like, what's the hiring process like? What do you look for?
The hiring process, I guess, differs from what sort of industry it is in. Like I know software companies have a pretty rigorous method of hiring tech writers. Like especially for permanent roles, you do have like 3 or 4 different rounds, and they probably are on par with what I've seen elsewhere as well. Like you'll have your first couple of interviews, and you'll have some sort of a writing test, and then you'll speak with the hiring manager plus someone else in the team. So that's pretty standard. With contract work, I guess it's not that rigorous, because they really want someone to come in quickly to address an issue, to solve a problem. So it's usually just one interview with a recruiter, one interview with the hiring manager, and you're in. So it's like I've never had to do a lot of sometimes it's not even that. I've just directly reached out to someone and I said, look, I heard you are hiring for a tech writer. Do you want to quickly catch up? And they're like, yeah, just meet. Let us, catch up over coffee. And at the end of it, they're like, yeah, that's fine. I'll sign you up for a 6-month contract. So it's been that easy as well. But and that's on the contracting side, because they know there's a lot more different thing. You're coming in with specific skills, and you're coming in to solve that particular issue at that time. So, so that's the hiring process with interviews. And I've been in a couple of interviews last few years before Redockley as well, and everything going around with the pandemic, where they really wanted tech writers in quickly, so they probably adjusted their hiring processes a little bit to just make it quicker to get in someone. But I don't know what it is right now with going around, but I would still think with permanent roles there's a lot more process, and that makes sense, to be honest. But with contracting, it's pretty it's who really in the network. If you know someone who's already looking, you just in quickly. Yeah.
What do the salaries look like?
To be honest, again, in the last 5 or 6 years, with the advent of software companies coming in, and a lot of specialized tech writing, so things like API documentation or developer documentation, I would say that both contract rates and permanent roles are looking much better these days. Like when I have a chat with the Write the Docs community here with the members, and we've discussed salaries, and people often say, well, what's a good salary to ask? Like what's a good hourly rate, or what's a good daily rate? And I think it has vastly improved. It's probably not on par with other scope, specialized skills, but I think it's definitely gone up. So if I had to put like a figure for a junior tech writer to start off with, they could easily be commanding up to $500 a day, 400 to 500 a day. And then really good tech writers, like senior or even higher, tech writers, they could easily be going up to $800 a day, or even more in specialized, areas where they really need a tech writer with those sort of skills. With perm, I guess if we had to translate that to perm, junior roles probably starting off at about 120 Australian dollars plus, plus superannuation, and it sort of builds on. So if you're more on a senior level, it could easily go up beyond 150. And if you're a manager, I think you can always obviously have that more, skills, and you're managing a team or leading a team of tech writers, you could be looking at even more. And those are just the figures I've seen. It could be different depending on what industry. I think software industries still pay a little bit more than any other industry, but they're pretty decent. Like from what I've seen when I started off as a tech writer to where it is right now, they're pretty decent. They're not on par with other sort of, roles like business analysts or testers or even developers, but they're pretty decent. They're like, I wouldn't complain, is what I'm saying.
What kind of visa do you need to be able to work in Australia as a tech writer?
I don't think there's any specific visa required for like you could come in as a skilled migration, like a normal, I don't know what subclass or class that visa is, but I would probably think it's on par with the American H-1B. So it's like a skilled migration visa. It's and then you can and you can work as a tech writer or work as any, like you have to obviously be assessed by the immigration or whatever the skills panel is. But as far as I know, there's not a specific visa class for tech writers. It just sort of falls, if I remember correctly, broadly under IT professionals or systems analysts or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so when you're applying for jobs, what kind of portfolio do you need, and what do employers look for, and what can get you rejected? Like, what are the do's and don'ts of interviewing for tech writing jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll actually talk about it more from a hiring perspective, because I'm at Redocly at the moment. We are actually hiring for tech writers, so that's my plug there. But regardless of that, even in my previous organization where I worked as a contractor, I was actually actively involved in hiring for other tech writers. And the thing that sort of set good tech writers or tech writers that had a portfolio or some sort of demonstrable work examples or work samples, that stood them in a far better light than people who didn't have that. I know some of the places they've worked on before might not have all that information, publicly available, or there could be, confidentiality agreements in place. But regardless of that, if there's any sort of, work samples that you can demonstrate your previous work experience, it makes it a lot more easier in the hiring process. And the other thing is obviously just being able to at least write a basic document without like error-free document in that sense. Like if you've got a decent tech writing test of some sort, being able to, create an error-free document that is clear and consistent, that obviously helps with that. Personally, as someone who's applied for roles before, I think what has got me through a couple of contracts, and this is, I remember distinctly because the recruiter actually, or the hiring manager mentioned this to me, was the reason he was selected was you had a really good, portfolio. Like in earlier days, I didn't really have an online portfolio. I used to carry my work samples on a CD, like a special CD that I used to burn for them. This is old days when we actually had a CD player in our machines. We don't have that anymore. But I actually used to carry my work samples in a CD, and I used to, hand it at the end of the interview saying that here are some of my work samples, like, they're not like any classified information in there, and I've redacted whatever I need to. So have a look at that and let me know. And then when someone reached out to me with an offer, they said, look, the thing that got you through was obviously that portfolio, because no one else had, bought that in that fashion and made it easier for us to make a decision. So having that is really important, having some sort of, demonstrable experience of what you've done in the past. So it could be, previous articles or something you've contributed to in your own words. Doesn't have to be, 100% what's on the website, but your efforts, your contribution towards the project, I think that really helps. In the past, I've really, applied for organizations and got through like fairly, like the tech writing tests have been pretty okay. And I've got through the second stage. And that's when, interesting things start to happen with me, or maybe just overall, I don't know what it is, but they actually changed their requirements midway. Like this is a couple of years back when I applied, they said, okay, we need a tech writer to come in and do our whatever developer docs. And I said, all right, that's fine. I've got some experience. And we did the writing test. They said, this is fantastic. You've created a big, good deliverable. We can go through, walk through it. And then next day they said, oh, look, we're changing our requirements. We really need a developer who can write documentation and not the other way around. I said, why did you even put out this requirement then? You're not looking for a tech writer. You're looking for developers really who have
Yeah.
that, additional writing thing. And that's fine. I've got nothing against it. But then you're just sort of misleading tech writers because, you're just wasting their time really, to be honest.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was one of the things. And the other thing was, and this is quite a few years back, so hopefully things have changed. I haven't been like recruiting or like hire actively applying for roles or anything at the moment, but a few years back I was called in by a recruiter. They said our client needs a tech writer, and I said, okay, let's have a chat. And they they called me in and they asked me all these different questions about how would you do this and how would you do that. I'm like, and this was earlier on in my career, so I didn't have like enough experience, but I still was able to sufficiently talk to them about tech writing. And they brought up some tools and processes, and I said, are you sure, are you after a tech writer? Because it sounds to me like it's a systems analyst role that the client is hiring for.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, it looks like you don't have the skills and you're still trying to sell yourself as a tech writer and whatever, so we probably won't be going ahead with that. I said, look, that's fine. I think it's probably I can cut it off here and I'll probably be happy with that. And the next day they actually changed the job listing to a systems analyst. I'm like, yeah, there you go. That's dodged
Yeah.
the bullet, definitely. So yeah, it's just that lack of understanding really with what tech writers do. And I still feel,
How does your experience differ from what you see in the Indian and the US tech writing communities? Like, can you, does it, the things that they talk about resonate with you, or do you feel like, oh, that's not applicable to me?
yeah, this is an interesting question. I'll give you a couple of examples. Like I've been to a couple of conferences, both in India and also US. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've always felt is, in some aspects, Australia sort of lags behind in the amount of, or the kind of documentation and the kind of documentation tools and processes that we follow here. Like, and historically, like I said, Australia's been very service driven, so we've got slightly different requirements out of tech writers. Like they're not all
Mm-hmm.
creating fancy documentation sites, they're just
Mm-hmm.
creating functional work, really work instructions or processes or policies. And I've done a lot of that. Now
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I get jealous of people in India or people in US who get to work with obviously good, like better products, but more than that, I think with documentation tools as well, they get to experience a lot more, like, and also influence a lot more with the documentation side of things. Here with a lot of initial contracts, we were, as the only tech writer, or as the first tech writer, I didn't really get a lot of choice with when it came to tools or the process that was set up or whatever. I just had to go in, create a deliverable and get out of there. So I think in that aspect, in my initial days, I did struggle because I didn't really get to play around with a lot of tools or, experience anything, experiment with anything really. So in that aspect, when I look at what's happening in the US, like a lot of these roles are now remote, obviously still remote to, within North America or whatever it might be. But when looking at the job adverts as well, the kind of requirements or the kind of tools and the processes that you get to work with, like we still seem to be lacking that in a lot of ways in Australia. Mind you, we're not complaining, it's just that it's just more, we just feel like as a tech writer in Australia we could have had the same experiences. And things have definitely changed in the last few years. We're getting a lot of API documentation, developer documentation, so we are doing a lot of tool based and processes and different experiences with getting to experience a different side of documentation. The same with India. Like I have so many people in India who are doing who are way ahead in terms of what they're doing, and and I'm looking at them, I'm like, I wonder if I'll ever able to get to that stage at all. Like, the even small things like the kind of teams that they have, like the number of team members in a tech writing team is like 20 or 40 or 60 or whatever. And I'm like, when I look back in the last 5 years, I've worked on 3 places where I was the only tech writer for a number of years. And I'm like, I don't have anyone to talk to really. I'm the only person here as a tech writer. And obviously and that's where I had to reach out to, other people in the community to help me out. But I just feel, I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. It's just different. Like I
Right.
always feel like, it's a very different experience being a tech writer in Australia. A few people who sort of, migrated or immigrated from India to Australia, and they share their experiences with me. And I'm like, if you've worked as a tech writer in India before, you're going to find things a lot slower, a lot more bureaucratic, and it's a lot more, still behind the ages, sort of like, in when it comes to documentation, especially if you worked in like some good technologies out in India or anywhere else, like offshore projects or what it might be. You're going to find things very slow and dull here, to be honest. Initially, you will eventually pick up, but it's just, be prepared for that. Things are very like, it's very different. It's the experience as a tech writer in Australia is very different.
Yeah, I completely understand the jealousy part, because that's how I used to feel when I used to work on user documentation.
Yeah.
Back in India, I used to feel that about like the people working on developer documentation, because they get like the fancy tools, like all the budget and all
Yeah.
the accolades, and I was like, but I want to do that too. Whereas I'm
Yeah.
like stuck in Vasant and XML, and it is so boring. So yeah, that was one of the factors that prompted me from user documentation to developer documentation, because I wanted the fancy tools.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I my first few years I've worked with nothing else but Microsoft Word. So look,
Mhm.
I've got nothing against it, but it's not the best documentation tool out there. Like, especially, and you're right in that case when you talk about, the been having those budgets to get better tools, better, improve the efficiencies of the
Mhm.
documentation. So just before Redocly, I worked for a place where, we, as a team of 3 tech writers, we really tried our best to get in a tool that allowed us to, perform our work better. And it
Mhm.
went through a 6-month process, and in the end it was rejected. They said, oh, we have security concerns. I'm like, at the same time, you've pulled in some, couple of other developer tools, testing tools with probably the
Mhm.
same amount of security concerns, and with,
Mhm.
100 times more budgets than what we are asking for. And that has gone through, like, where's the justice in all of that? We're just trying to do the same thing. We're just in a, from a documentation perspective. And that's where that understanding of what tech writers do, I feel, is like really, really, poor in some organizations. And um, I guess tech writers are to blame for that, really. Like, we can't just put the blame on just the people within the organizations. I think it's tech writers themselves who don't advocate for the role, don't advocate for the value, and they just go in and do the work. Yeah, I just feel, kind of sorry for them, because they're making life difficult for themselves. Like, yeah, they're never going to get new tools, and they're never going to be involved in, like bigger projects where there's lack of documentation, but they never get to experience that.
Yeah, which is why your role is so important, the tech writer advocate. I really love that title.
Yeah, it's different, isn't it? Like, when the manager first spoke to me and I said, this is the role, I'm like, this is pretty good. Like, I've been doing this for a number of years, but not without the title. Now that I have a title, obviously I can have more influence in that as well. So it's a really good place to work. And yeah, I get to do a lot of fun stuff as well. Like, um, obviously with writing, like I said, I do presentation at conferences and meetups, but um, last year I sort of managed the Google season of docs program for our company. So I got,
Yeah.
we had a couple of tech writers and we mentored them, and I was, managing the project in the background, and that was a fantastic experience as well.
Mhm. Can you talk more about that, the season of docs and your experience with it?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think I've seen both sides of those fences, because I was a participant in the season of docs in 2019, I think, when I
Right.
first applied for a open source project. I'd never worked with one before, so I thought I wanted to get that experience. And it was a very global team that I worked
Mhm.
with, and there's a lot of things that I when I worked on there, I realized I don't get to do that. And this is what I mean. When I work with global teams, I find the experience so different. Like small things, like I said, I suggested making a template for the developers so they can actually create the documentation themselves. And then I said, let's implement this. I'll create a new topic based on this, and I'll show you how it's done. And then during one of those, weekly sync meetings, someone said, we do realize that, you're doing this, but you also have to understand that once you write this document is going to be translated into 18 languages. I'm like, yeah, I never thought about that. Like none of my work in Australia has ever been translated. Like every single project I've worked on in the past has just been one language, one audience sort of a thing. So never had to work with localization, never had to work with translation, projects or whatever. And like, see, this is the kind of experience we don't get often. So that was, that was a good experience working with that particular project. And got to create some templates, work with developers, and update a lot of existing documentation that helped them. So I was pretty happy with that. And then last year when I joined Redocly, I said we have a couple of open source projects. So I pitched to my manager, we should participate in Google season of docs and try and get external tech writers to help out with our open source documentation. So we did that. We got our proposal accepted by Google, and then we worked with a couple of tech writers who worked on our open source projects, and it was fantastic. Like they made some small changes, like incremental changes, but it had a vast impact. Like some of our documentation, and when we analyzed it, like when you tracked it through Google and the Google Analytics side of things, we found that there's been like a 200% jump in the documentation. Like people were really reading it and actually finding it useful. So we were like, this proves the value of that, getting in good documentation written, or even making small things clear sometimes. And yeah, I just had a different experience because I was mentoring tech writers, and I was also managing the side of things, so making sure I was submitting those reports, preparing a case study at the end of it. And yeah, so it was fantastic, the whole experience. I think the whole season of docs is a really good experience especially for new tech writers who've never worked with any tech writing project before. I think this is a great opportunity for them to jump into something and contribute to an open source project. But it's a good thing that you get paid for it. So it's not like people are working for free, but it's also that experience working with people all over the world, and creating some really valuable stuff. And here's the thing: at the end of it, you get some deliverables that are obviously available publicly, but you can also add it to your portfolio, and you can keep working on the project after the season of docs finishes. So that's a really good program right there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think they just announced their 2022 session. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So they just kicked off yesterday, I think, and they just so it's just a very early stage. So it's only the organizations applying for the projects this year. But I think mid-March is when all the action starts happening, when the organizations are announced and everything. So yeah, people can jump in and create proposals, like tech writers or other contributors can actually pitch their proposals for working on a project. In Australia, there's a lot more scope for advocacy on that front. And as part of my role as managing the Write the Docs Australia community, I think one of my goals this year is to actually advocate more for tech writing within different industries. So I think software industries, or even like other developer focused products, they probably have a fair idea of what tech writers do, but a lot of other organizations still feel there's a little bit amount of work left in advocating for good documentation, good how the hiring process works, or where to look for tech writers and what can they work on. So it's not just a linear sort of a thing, like they just don't come in and create one document. They can actually help you test out products. They can help you actually improve the product interface as well in some ways. So a lot of different skills that tech writers bring that this like people are just sort of unaware of. So one of my goals this year is to work advocating on some of that with different industries. So talking to different industries and even doing presentations with them, just to tell them these are 5 things I've worked in the past. I had no idea, or the organization had no idea that I could do this, and I still managed to do it. And this is how it has improved their overall product experience.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I do have a similar interview story, but not when I was interviewing for jobs right now, but when I was
Yeah.
interviewing at the time, I was interviewing with Cockroach, like the
Yeah.
only other company I applied to with Cockroach, and that call, like the hiring manager on the phone, he kind of realized that this is not the role we are looking for,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
troubleshooting it live, the job requirements.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, he was like, I'm so sorry I wasted your time, but I guess this is not what we want. And like, cool. So yeah, just
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
lack of understanding.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I mean, look, it happens. And I've been on the hiring process enough to know, like, sometimes you just have to, not being able to select people is sometimes a pain, but it's just it's just how you put it across to them is more important, like providing that valuable feedback, like giving feedback they can actually work on. Like maybe you can tell them things like, we really liked your interviewing styles and your writing style, when you submitted the test, but I think you lacked in these areas, and this
Hmm.
is something we were looking for, so we went with someone who had that for that particular role. But that's not saying we won't look at you in the future. And there have been instances we've called them back for a small contract because we know they could have got that work done. So it's just making sure that having that the right kind of feedback, like just some organizations I've worked with it, the kind of rejection emails, or even the justification they've provided, not only to me, to other people. Like other people in the network have said, this is what they've told me, and like I can't believe they've actually told you that, because I don't think
Hmm.
that is correct.
Hmm.
But it's the way the hiring the dice roll sometimes. So you just have to, yeah, roll with it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. So your advocacy work around Australia right now, where do people find you? Like, are you doing any presentations that we should know about, or like, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah. Look, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, pretty active on Twitter. Swapnil, the same on LinkedIn. So you'll find me there. I've got a couple of presentations coming up right now, and I'm presenting at it's actually in US. I'm presenting at Convex in Arizona, and
Mm-hmm.
the STC Summit in Chicago later in May. So those are the two that are coming up. And I don't have anything else sort of scheduled for now. But with the Write the Docs, obviously, we will plan our annual conference again late in the year. So yeah, I'll be actively you know doing work on that, getting the conference, because we took a break last year because of lack of just the mental fatigue around the pandemic. But this year I think
Yeah.
we're in a much better place to have a conference again. So yeah, I'll start kind of working and kicking off the tires on that process soon.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll link all your socials in the description box below so people can go find you. And thanks so much for watching. I hope this was fun. I hope this was informational. And I'll see you next time.